Well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Victoria Hills. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and I'm delighted that during this the Planner Live Online week that we are able to bring you the first inaugural session of Hope. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to ask everyone to mute their microphones because I can hear a little bit of feedback. Apologies for that. Everyone can be on mute. Thank you. So, welcome to Hope. What I had hoped was that Hope would be an in-person networking event, and what we were due to have right now was a nice informal lunch at networking, an opportunity to meet with other chief planning officers. Now, because of the global pandemic, we can't meet in person, but I didn't want a pandemic to get in the way of the opportunity of launching Hope. Hope stands for Heads of Planning Everywhere. We have some fantastic, strong networks of chief planning officers throughout the UK and Ireland. We have POSU in Wales, we have Heads of Planning Scotland, HOPS, we have the Planning Officers Society in Northern Ireland, we have NILGA. But what we didn't do was actually take the opportunity to bring together that strong network of chief planners, heads of planning across the UK and Ireland to broaden the conversation. Now, when we launched the corporate strategy, our new ambitious corporate strategy in January this year, we put supporting planning services at the heart of the delivery of the corporate strategy. Indeed, it's one of the 4 pillars. Why did we do that? Well, without doubt, whether you're a developer, a landowner, a planner working in the public sector, a planner working in the private sector, or someone who's just genuinely interested in community and planning, we heard consistently the need for strong local authority planning functions. We at the RTPI are going to consistently make that case to government that if you don't resource planning to work at that local authority level, then nothing works. That's a slight exaggeration because, of course, us planners are very resilient. But in making that case, we thought, well, it's really an excellent opportunity to bring together chief planning officers from across the UK and Ireland, and to do that once a year to talk about a pertinent topic, a hot topic. Now, when we planned this, little did I know that we would be entering into a global pandemic. So it won't surprise to hear you that today's topic of conversation is going to be about how local authority planning and planners have been responding to the global pandemic. So what we've done is we've invited a selection of planning officers from around the UK and Ireland, from the larger organisations, but also a cross-section from metropolitans, counties, districts, etc., so that we can have a really rich conversation and opportunity for debate. I'm delighted that we've assembled a panel of 7 chief planning officers, heads of planning here from around the UK and Ireland, and to really lead that discussion. So I'm going to let them introduce their actual job title, what they do, and I'm going to give them 5 minutes each to answer this question: how have you been responding to the global pandemic? What are you doing differently? How is planning shaping up? What do we need to do going forward? Now, I know that's a ridiculous ask to summarise all of that in 5 minutes, but rest assured, we have had a bit of a run through, and each of our 7 fabulous panellists are going to provide their own take on what they've been up to during this extraordinary time. We will start off with Jennifer Peters from Tower Hamlets. Very, very busy London Borough. Really interested to hear from Jennifer as to what's been going on there. And then we are going to move a little bit further north into Oxfordshire and speak with Bev Hindle. Very hot area for development, rarely out of planning headlines. So really interested to hear from Bev what's been going on there. We will then move a little bit further north to speak with MacLeod from Birmingham. Huge growth plans, big ambitions for the city centre. Really interested to hear what's been happening during this interesting period and how things are moving forward. We're then going to go quite a bit further north. We're going to speak to Pam Ewan in Fife to hear what's been going on in Scotland. Now, I've had a few insights on what's been going on in Scotland, and it's been really impressive. So really great opportunity to share some of that learning and experience from Scotland. We're then going to hop across to Belfast City to hear from Aidan Thatcher. Again, really fascinating opportunity to hear what's going on in Northern Ireland. And then we will be going to Wales and the Vale of Glamorgan. I'm delighted to be joined by Victoria Robinson to hear how things are going there. And then we will go full circle back down south to Sevenoaks, and Richard Morris will be updating us on how Sevenoaks has been responding. So we'll give 5 minutes each, and then we will have an opportunity for questions and answers, and then we will be wrapping up, I can assure you, in just under an hour and a half's time. We may get through it quicker, but let's see how we go. And so thank you so much for joining. This will be an annual event for sure. I'm really looking forward to this discussion, so let's get it away. So I have my stopwatch, Jennifer. So without further ado, Jennifer Peters, please can you introduce us and introduce yourself, sorry, to us, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be here virtually. So I'm Jennifer Peters, Divisional Director of Planning and Building Control at Tower Hamlets. And I suppose I've got a few things to talk about, some sort of processy things and some more big picture issues that we've seen. So our planning service, like most, I think, was fast to adapt to a new and innovative ways of working as soon as we went into lockdown to ensure we continued working. In line with government's planning update, which I think came out in sort of late March, the team have been working proactively with applicants, residents and other stakeholders in a pragmatic way, finding new ways to sort of carry on doing what we do best. Fortuitously, we'd gone digital in January, ditching sort of paper case files and ensuring all applications came in through digital systems. And I think without that, the last few months would have been very difficult, if not impossible, we'd have to have a lot more people in the office than we've been able to get by on recently. Like everywhere, video conferencing like this and Zoom and Teams, something that I'd never used before, to be honest, now become sort of critical day-to-day parts of our jobs. But so too have people like our customer service assistants and our duty planners who are doing on-call advice, and they've become much more the front line of the planning service perhaps than they ever were before. And also those who can get into the office locally, either by cycling or walking, to print out site notices and put them up, have become our kind of lifeline. So in the early period of lockdown, a lot of our site visits had already happened, so we could carry on sort of progressing those kind of applications. And those that hadn't, we'd started using more kind of photos, satellite images and street views to ascertain if you could make a decision without a site visit. Now, as things are relaxing a bit more, where we feel we need a site visit, we can go and do that. And actually tonight we've got our first development committee site visit because a decision was deferred on a site visit. So we'll see how that goes tonight, obviously adhering to all the rules of social distancing. Now, actually in Tower Hamlets, we've got quite generous delegated decision powers. So that means that the issue about virtual committees didn't come up until a bit later than perhaps it did for some other boroughs. But we've had our virtual committees, we've had a few now, we've done virtual member pre-apps and virtual urban design panels, and they all seem to be working fine. And actually in terms of decisions, we're actually getting through more decisions, or in the first couple of months we were, I think because we had a bit of a slowdown in applications coming in, we could actually sort of get through some backlogs. So in some ways that was useful. Now, in terms of kind of the bigger picture, I suppose in the first couple of months we did see a drop in applications, and obviously for chief planners that has implications for our income, but we're seeing that pick up again now. Not to jinx it, I suppose, saying this picking up, but it's interesting to see what's actually coming in, because I'd say that we're still getting in the same kind of applications, so big high density development, including student housing and co-living schemes. And I think that either means that the development industry thinks this is going to be a fairly short-lived issue and that we're going to go on as normal after this, or it means that they've not really worked out what it means for development, and that's still to come. So we might have a bit of a pause on development or applications in the next few months as people kind of work that out. Now, luckily, we have quite recently adopted a local plan and a seal charging schedule. Unusually, you may know exactly when we adopted our seal charging schedule, as it's come out as the day after our rather controversial planning decision by Mr. Jenrick. But consultation on policy and guidance, I think, feels a bit harder than perhaps some of the planning applications, because you usually have the big sort of events where you talk to people face to face, or you stand in kind of local shopping areas and talk to people. So we're trying to think about how we do that in a way that still includes all of the people in the borough. And we've got some consultations that did start before lockdown and they've continued, but the more spatial ones, we're trying to think, how do we use technology to engage people in those and use the networks that we have, and the networks actually they've built up during the kind of COVID, you know, the voluntary sector sort of COVID response. But I suppose in kind of the bigger picture stuff that's come out of this, I think it's not new necessarily, but the importance of decent housing that people can afford has become even more important, I think. We've got quite fixated, or the government have to an extent, and us as well, on numbers. But in terms of quality of stock, it's really important. A lot of my staff, probably like yours, don't have the luxury of a home office. If they're lucky, they're sitting at a kitchen table or a makeshift desk. If they're less lucky, they'll be in a bedroom of a shared house or in their parents' house. And often people have got children at home trying to work with children around them with no separate space to do schoolwork and homework. And then the importance of outside private amenity space has never been so important, and also local parks, not just bits of green space, but actual parks where you can do, you know, exercise, play football, and actually relax and have a nice time. Now, all of these things, as I say, we knew that there was a crucial lack of housing supply at the right price. But I think as we see the impacts of people being squeezed in, you know, places that aren't big enough for them, it becomes more of an issue now that your home is not just where you kind of sleep and spend your evenings. It's where you work, it's where you spend all of your leisure time and, you know, all of your time, and it has such an impact on your mental health if you don't have enough space that you need. So I think what I've learned out of the last few months is our role as planners is even more crucial to ensure that we get delivering the right development of the right sizes and at the right prices.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. That's fabulous, and really strong messages there. And I've made a couple of points to come back on. We will keep the pace on, but what I should say to everyone joining at the moment, if you've got questions, if you could use the chat function, the question function, to start putting them on, then we can come back to those as we go through. But it's really interesting there that things are picking up. But actually, importance of planning now has never been, you know, so important. And for whatever reason, it's been in the news rather a lot lately. So we can take the opportunity to reinforce these messages. So thank you very much. Now, another area that sometimes makes a few headlines is Oxfordshire. So I'm delighted we've got Bev Hindle here. And Bev, I think you're going to say a little bit about virtual operations, but also carbon reduction and a few other observations. So please do introduce yourself to everybody, and over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Victoria, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bev Hindle. I'm the director of the Oxfordshire Growth Board. That represents the 6 local authorities in Oxfordshire. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but I'm also the director of the Oxford to Cambridge ARC leadership groups, and I'll touch a little bit about that scale of work as well. I won't repeat what Jennifer said, echo a lot of that is very much similar in Oxfordshire. I guess a couple of things I'll focus on though in terms of our frontline staff. Very early on, I think there was quite a bit of panic in the system, really. Well, in fact, there wasn't any panic. I think things just kind of ground to a halt, actually. And it was probably more or less as Jennifer was suggesting, probably because we just didn't know how to cope in these times in terms of the technology, in terms of what was available to us. So very early on, we called for some delays to some of our plan making, simply because people weren't either available, they've been redirected to frontline recovery work, particularly our planners and our democratic services teams. But then after about 3 or 4 weeks, a month or so, things started to pick back up. People were getting a bit more comfortable. And I think our team's user rate in the county council went from something like 1% to 89% within about 2 weeks, from literally 5 meetings to something like 1,000. And that's been fantastic. And what's been really amazing is the nervousness and trepidation over the technology. And particularly when you're going into the world of bringing members into it, and members they can be in rural places, they can be in urban places, well-connected, not so well-connected places. And actually the technology's held up pretty good for us. We've had a growth board meeting which was all local authorities on different platforms, different systems. We did have to use Zoom, much against our ICT advice in local government, but it worked very, very well. And then the Oxford to Cambridge ARC leadership meeting of 40 different partners also took place on a Teams call and worked very, very well. In fact, I've got a lot of people complimenting the fact that it was unusual because on a Friday, it was normally followed by a 3-hour drive back to wherever they lived across the ARC, and they actually were already home. So there is something certainly in terms of the way we go forward that we need to keep an eye on. But in terms of workload, what's really fascinating as well is the types of things that we've started talking about and have to talk about. We were very lucky in Oxfordshire. We were just developing a digital platform called Open Thought, which was to support the Oxfordshire Plan. It was a non-formal engagement digital platform where we wanted to talk to people in a different way. We've got an evidence-based planning system in this country, but when you're going to 2050, you need a vision-led plan. And so we really need more anecdotal and more local evidence built up in terms of what people were thinking for the future. So we've put on that platform 3 basic questions about how do people see us living, how do people see us moving about, and how do people see us dealing with carbon reduction and carbon zero. And at the time, this was pre-COVID, we thought it'd be a really interesting conversation. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation because of COVID, frankly. And I think that's a big theme that I'm focusing on now, which is what is the role of planners and in fact, all people within the growth system, what can they play to keep us thinking about that and keep that on the front foot? And supporting a strong economy and a strong recovery is absolutely fundamental to that, but doing it in a green way, a clean way, an inclusive way suddenly becomes our key challenge. I think we've all seen what that starts to look like and the kind of measures we might have to undertake to be able to achieve some of those things. So a lot of our planners, or in particular our policy planners, are refocusing their thoughts about, wait a second, this is a really great time to get some new policy and objectives cleared and ambitions cleared, which then raises real questions. So it's another 2 years till we're finished our Oxfordshire plan. So we're now thinking, do we do something in the shorter term to express the desire and the need to change that will inform our plan, but also make sure that we're informing our recovery strategy, which will obviously be prepared this year. Downside, we have a housing and growth deal with the government, and unfortunately, as Victoria said, sometimes that puts us into the public's eye. None of that is being delivered to the same timetable as previously pre-COVID. Almost all of our infrastructure programs shut down. Almost all of our housing development shut down. Certainly our affordable housing program shut down. But yet our milestones haven't changed. So there's some real angst and conversations going on with government. And I'm sure we're not unique. There's probably lots of conversations with government going on around the country around whether it's devolution or where we go next with growth deals. And that's certainly something that's been taking quite a bit of my time. So I'll leave it on the fact that, as you said, Victoria, I know there's lots of negativity around COVID, and of course, we'd never want to go through this again. However, there's some real opportunities here, I think, as Jennifer was starting to tease out, for planners to be right at the forefront of this conversation. Quite frankly, pre-COVID, we were all wondering how we were ever going to deliver carbon zero going forward. And I think we at least have some hints about what might have to take place, and that's an opportunity for us, quite frankly. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
That's great, Bev, to finish on that positive point, because you know, as many people are saying, don't miss a crisis to really bake in some real opportunities for change. And indeed, the day that we've launched our new campaign, #PlanTheWorldWeNeed, we completely agree with that. Now is the opportunity to make the case for many of the things you've been alluding to there, which we'll come back to in the discussion. So I'm going to move us on now to a city growth region, if you like. Some very ambitious plans in Birmingham, and lots and lots going on. Certainly there was the last time I was there last year, with tramways being built and you know, real big names relocating out of London to move to the second city, and that's before you even mention the Commonwealth Games. So Ian MacLeod, you've got a lot on your plate. Please introduce yourself, and maybe you'll show yourself. Can you show yourself to us, Ian? Are you there? Have we lost Ian? We may have lost Ian, but Ian, we're not going to miss the opportunity. Having bigged up that introduction, we will come back to you, which means actually gives me the perfect opportunity to introduce Pam Ewan from Fife. Now, Pam, you wear a couple of hats, which you could introduce yourself also But from my observation, Scotland has been very much ahead of the game in certain areas of legislation, for example. I won't say any more than that, but Pam, great to have you here. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Victoria, and happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully your Mondays haven't morphed from the weekend and you're still getting a bit of distinction between home and work life. So as Victoria says, I'm Pam Ewan. I'm Head of Planning, Chief Planner in Fife Council in Scotland, and I'm also Senior Chair of Heads of Planning Scotland. It's really good to be part of this event, not just to share some of the things that I will talk through, but also to learn from other heads of planning and chief planners across the UK. So this morning when I was preparing, I thought, well, late March, as I was assisting colleagues to decant our office in Glenrothes, it seems like a lot longer than 3 months ago, and whoa, what a journey we've been on, and also what a journey we have still to go on. And it's the latter that I think is really exciting for planning and planners across the UK, if indeed not across the world. So we've been on our journey, as others have expressed, and whilst that journey has most definitely been very challenging, particularly at the outset, I do feel that we're moving to a positive place where we can build further on engaging with our communities, on the collaborative work that we do, reforming some of our work areas, and really reconsidering almost the contract that we have with colleagues, and particularly in relation to how we work more flexibly. So in Fife Planning Authority pre-COVID, we were largely an e-planning service. I think it was about 97% of our applications were submitted online. There really was very little paper about the office as you walked about. Thankfully, when I look back, about 30% of my staff worked from home regularly, once or twice a week, so that was the norm for them. And we were pretty agile. So on that week, when we moved to a phase, but a pretty rapidly phased, let's all get up and move from home and supporting people, I was really thankful of our business technology support colleagues who have been absolutely brilliant in Fife throughout this. But we had pre-COVID implemented Office 365, and we have been blessed with the wonders of Microsoft Teams, which has kept us very much agile and without hiccup. So just a few highlights of the changes, perhaps the challenges, and looking forward to the reforms that this situation has actually given us some time to look at how we can positively change. So like many of the speakers before me, we stopped doing a lot pretty immediately, and that was right. We stopped doing site visits. Instead of that, like others, we've been using photographs. We have been successful for a number of years now in using drone. So we had on stock a lot of drone material for our major applications, or what we call our strategic development areas, of which there are 9 across Fife. So that was there for colleagues to have access and to look at. We moved quickly to our virtual planning committees, workshops, team meetings, essentially replicating as best as possible our normal working day. And a number of challenges came with that. I'm very, very thankful to have a fantastic team of managers that work with me and positively respond to the change that was needed to be put in place. One of the key challenges for me was the importance, not just at a corporate level within the council, but that internal and external consistency and positivity in the messages that we were putting out to our colleagues, to reassure them, to make sure as best as possible they were in a positive place to do the best possible job they could do, balancing lots of different challenges, and also communicating positively to our customers and our investors out there. So that's been really an important role for myself as a leader and working with others. My chief executive has also taken on a key role and continues to send out Friday, as they're called, Friday early evening videos to all staff, and that's been really good. In my heads of planning role, I immediately started working very collaboratively, particularly with the Scottish Government, to help them really look at the operational frontline needs for changes to legislation, guidance, feedback, where were the little hurdles that we needed to get around. It wasn't just the Scottish Government. RTPI Scotland director was heavily involved, Homes for Scotland, Scottish Property Federation, and really whoever needed to be around that virtual table was there to collectively arrive at any changes. The challenge that we're currently experiencing is people in Scotland come off furlough, and you've got to remember that we're a couple of weeks behind in terms of the restrictions being lifted. Some of the big restrictions in our town centres and shops are just being lifted just now. So as people come off furlough from consultancies and house builders, and they're looking for their conditions, pre-start conditions to be cleansed, the construction, additional hours of construction to be increased, then there's a real pressure on staff, and we're really seeing that now to turn around. But that has to be balanced. I'm 53% down in income as of last week, and that's only at the end of Q1 of this financial year, and we're about 50% down in planning applications or applications that attract a fee in Scotland. So that's really challenging financially for myself and for the council as a whole. We've positively taken on many of the chief planner from Scottish Government. He has released a number of letters to help ease some of the planning restrictions around hours of construction, use of fast food takeaways, and a whole load of aspects really around that. We have implemented some key changes to assist those people who are needing to extend their construction hours, but importantly, making sure the communities are updated, putting the onus on the house builder to liaise with those communities, and also working with colleagues in environmental health, roads and licensing of all the changes. So I really do consider that we've done a pretty good job. Yes, we've had our challenges. We've grown stronger as a service out of this. We've really helped each other. And some of the challenges that lie ahead are more about how we better replicate that day-to-day time in the office. I like to talk. I like a blether, as we say in Scotland. So I would spend at least half an hour a day just walking around the office and chatting to staff. And it wouldn't just be about work. You would find out how somebody's son was doing at football, etc., etc. I really miss that, so I'm trying to refocus my diary to connect with people in that way. In my heads of planning role in Scotland, there's been a number of fantastic examples across Scotland. Aberdeenshire Council have really moved fast to do their local plan consultation virtually online through a town hall, and I would recommend you looking at that. Edinburgh City Council have really excelled in the regular blogs they have done and how they've communicated that. And there are a whole host of authorities. But the one thing that's really come across with me is our collaborative working across planning authorities with RTPI Scotland and others, and how we really work together to support each other. So where an authority has had an issue, another one has come in to help resolve that. And I think that's really important and strengthened the planning profession in Scotland. Just touching for my last few 30 seconds on reform, we're reassessing.
Yeah, please carry on.
We're reassessing some of our processes through lean processes. We won't be undertaking a site visit of every single site, which we've traditionally just done. We'll be leaving that to the case officer to make their own professional judgment. And as part of our annual planning performance framework review, we're using COVID and how we've reacted as a case study. So there's lots of good positives to take out of it, and I hope that's helped share our learning.
Well, there's so much there that there's lots I'd like to come back on, and we will do at the end. Thank you very much, Pam Ewan from Fife, for those who have just joined us, because I'm looking, the number of attendees are going up as this goes on. Now, I do hope at some point that Ian MacLeod from Birmingham will rejoin us, but I've got Aidan Thatcher lined up here, Aidan. So you will have heard a couple of things there, Aidan. 97% of applications being online. Wow, I'd be interested to hear your views on what it might be like to achieve that in a Northern Ireland context. Can I introduce Aidan Thatcher from Belfast City Council? Over to you, Aidan. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. So I'm Aidan Thatcher. I'm the Director of Planning and Building Control at Belfast City Council. And it was interesting to hear a lot of that work about moving online and having systems up and ready to receive online applications We don't have that in Northern Ireland yet, so we're diametrically opposed to some of the discussion that Pam just gave up in Fife. We still have a requirement in legislation for 4 hard copies of every single planning document to be submitted. So that's what it was like when I started my career in planning over in England. So when I came over to Northern Ireland 2 years ago, it did feel like stepping back in time somewhat. However, we have been able to move a lot of the processes online, and we have accepted digital submissions, not through a planning system like you're used to across the water, but by email. So we've set up workarounds to be able to receive digital planning applications. And alongside that, we then had to change all of our processes and procedures and issue new guidance to staff, which is much more challenging when all of those staff are working in their individual homes and offices rather than in the office. So getting that coordination and clear guidance has been really key for us. We started the digital submissions with a real simple extension to a commercial premises just to test whether we were actually able to do that with our workarounds. And we've actually moved to enabling an urban extension application for 650 units, leisure, retail and commercial. So that's been really useful for us, not least to keep the economy going, but also that helped with our financial position, because that was one of the largest applications that Belfast City Council had ever received, with the associated fee that goes with that. So that has helped to cushion some of the impact that some of the other speakers have spoken about. The good news is we are moving forward in Northern Ireland with a new system so that we can have electronic submissions. And today there was the press release which confirms that that will be by TerraQuest, so it will be a very familiar system to those that work across the water as well. And we will be retaining our electronic processes moving forward, because it actually creates a lot of efficiencies for us, as I'm sure English authorities found back in the early 2000s. We've also been at a crucial stage of our local development plan. We were quite lucky. We've done our public consultation and we handed it over to the Planning Appeals Commission, which is our equivalent of the Planning Inspectorate. So we gave that to them in January. What we have been doing is progressing with a lot of preparation for our independent examination. So that's been useful for the team, some of which have never been through such a process before. We are liaising with the Planning Appeals Commission as well to try and find out what their timeframe for progressing and how they're intending to host the independent examination, and whether it will be digitally through technology like this, or whether we'll be at an advanced stage where we can actually do it in person. It has had some issues for us in terms of making sure our plan remains sound, because one of our tests of soundness is having an up-to-date timetable. And without knowing the new timetable of the Planning Appeals Commission when they're going to hear the document, so we've had to submit a new timetable to our government here based on assumptions, because we haven't had a huge amount of communication back from the Planning Appeals Commission. We've also been looking and working with our government here in relation to legislation changes. So we have a requirement for all major planning applications to hold a pre-community consultation. Traditionally, they've been in person and events in local community centres close to the development. Our government did change the legislation on that quite quickly to be able those sorts of events to be held online using technology like this, and that's been really successful and has helped keep the wheels moving. And we've had a few applications submitted to us now which have had those types of events. We are looking for further reform of legislation. We haven't been quite as proactive as particularly Scotland and England and Wales have been, so we don't have extensions for time frames of planning permissions, but that's something we would really like to progress. Likewise, for enforcement investigations, it would be really useful if they were extended for, say, 12 months as well. And we're working with the Northern Ireland government to see whether there's the potential to progress that. and we're using the RTPI Northern Ireland branch to try and help further some of those discussions as well. We are also looking at further changes as well. So Northern Ireland has quite a different legislative framework. The planning system's only been devolved back to local government 5 years ago, and some parts didn't get devolved. So we're really pushing for this, to use this as an opportunity to have, say, heritage and roads devolved to local government as well, just so there's a more rounded view that could be taken by the planning authority itself. So in summary, I think there's been a really good move to be able to change how we do things. The team have worked really hard to be able to do things in different ways. And what we've been doing is keeping systems moving so that the economic impact of Northern Ireland is as limited as possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, because I think you said so many things that we can bring back into discussion. But the key one there for viewers who were unaware of this, as I wasn't until I came into the job I'm doing now, is that local authorities in Northern Ireland have only had planning powers for 5 years. So just at the time when you're getting your feet under the table and getting into the swing of things, you hit a global pandemic. So I can't begin to imagine how much more challenging it must be within that context. But it does sound like things are bearing up incredibly well there. So I'm going to move us now into Wales. I'm delighted that we've got Victoria Robinson from the Vale of Glamorgan. Victoria also wears another hat, which I'm sure you'll tell us about, Victoria. And really looking forward to hearing about collaboration, enforcement, development plans. How have local authorities, including your own, been bearing up in Wales? Victoria, over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. It's good to join you all. So my role is Operational Manager for Planning and Building Control at the Vale of Glamorgan Council, which is in South East Wales area next door to Cardiff, for those that know it. Famous for Barry and Barry Island, if any of you have been lucky enough to visit us. I'm also Vice Chair of Planning Officer Society for Wales, and I think just like at any other time, to be honest, we've really benefited from having that close-knit group of local planning authorities in Wales. There's 25 of us in total, so we're only a small country. We're all able to get together regularly, and we do that. And unfortunately, the lockdown caused us to miss our trip to Goobert in West Wales, where we usually come together for 2 days and have a really good session like this in person, all the chief planning officers in Wales, and it's a really good learning experience. So I think this is a great move by the RTPI to kind of do that at a national level, because I know we benefit from that in Wales. But using that collaboration has been really helpful, I think, during the pandemic period, because all the kind of issues that everyone's talked about already that we had early on, you know, we were in regular contact as chief planning officers across Wales to say, how are you doing it? What's happening? Let's try and be consistent, because our customers are used to working across different local authority boundaries in Wales. And so consistency of service provision was going to be important, and we've managed to achieve that. And also, similar to colleagues that have already mentioned, working closely with Welsh Government officials to respond to some of the key issues that cropped up early on in terms of the pandemic. So we worked with them around new permitted development rights for emergency powers, emergency healthcare facilities and so on. Changes to construction hours we've been talking about with them, and other kind of issues that have come out of the pandemic. So similar to Aidan in Northern Ireland, we have a requirement here in Wales for major developments to carry out pre-application consultation, and during the lockdown a number of people were live doing those, so Welsh Government had to change the regulations to reflect that. And we're having ongoing discussions about any other further changes that are needed to deal with both flexibility in terms of relaxing regulations around planning, and also processing planning applications. So that's been really, really useful. One of the issues I wanted to flag up that's been really quite a lot of our work during lockdown has been around enforcement. And I don't know whether this is unique to the Vale of Glamorgan, I doubt it is, but it seemed during lockdown everyone decided to be naughty boys and girls and started to do an awful lot of unauthorised activity whilst everybody else was in lockdown. So we had a 30% increase in complaints around enforcement activities, lots of sort of strange dumping of materials throughout the countryside and things like that. And so all of a sudden my enforcement team were busier than ever, and during a time when they were obviously limited in terms of their site visit capabilities and so on. But we've maintained that service throughout and continue to be very busy. And that's also been a reflection, I think, of the fact that customers have been at home so much and so are much more sensitive to noisy construction sites and things like that. So we're getting an awful lot of complaints around that, around takeaway, increasing takeaway uses. So on the one hand, the government are trying to deal with that flexibility of opening up shops, restaurants to takeaways and so on. But you know, we certainly are seeing the impact on our communities from all of that increased activity and getting a lot of complaints around noise, nuisance, smells, littering, etc. So quite a challenging area, which is certainly more active than it normally is, I would say. And then the other issue I think is probably worth talking about is the impact on our customers of the lockdown and their ability to engage with us. So just like other colleagues have talked about, you know, we have adapted the way we work. We were already paperless, so everything that we do is already available for customers to view online. But obviously that's not going to be appropriate for everybody, and not all of our customers can access the information that they want online. They're used to coming into the office and talking with the planning officer and going through their concerns, say with neighbours and so on, and we're not able to do that at the moment. So I think that's becoming a bit more of a challenge now as the lockdown drags on, if you like, because I think in the first few weeks, customers were quite, and developers were quite willing to be flexible and understanding of the initial adapting to this new way of working. Now, some months on, I think customers are really expecting more from us in terms of that face-to-face contact and that customer focus. And I think that's a challenge that we're going to have to grapple with over the next few months and weeks as this carries on. And also the risk of potentially judicial review and challenge around people being able to fully engage in the planning application process. We've already had customers on sort of major and controversial schemes saying, well, you just shouldn't be determining this application, you shouldn't be dealing with it, you shouldn't be consulting on it, it's lockdown, people can't access it. And so those are issues I think we have to grapple with, and we have to make sure that we are being as open and engaging as we possibly can be with all of our customers, whether those are applicants, developers or representatives. So yeah, I think that's probably some of the key issues, building on what others have said.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, and as planners know, process and attention to those details are so important to avoid any challenges there. And what we're hearing through this is there's so many benefits from the digital opportunities, but there's also clearly a need for some of that personal contact, and you know, this will be a challenge for us as we balance this going forward. Without further ado, I want to move on now to what would have been our final speaker. We are hoping that MacLeod from Birmingham can rejoin us, perhaps by phone shortly, but we've got Richard Morris here lined up from Sevenoaks. Some of you may know Sevenoaks from visiting there. Some of you may have read about it in the planning press recently. So another interesting growth area, lots going on. Richard, please introduce yourself to us. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Richard Morris. I'm the Chief Officer for Planning and Regulatory Services at Sevenoaks, which is in West Kent. But this year, I'm also privileged to be the President of the Planning Officers Society. It's always slightly tricky being later down the agenda because so many interesting things have already been said. So I'll do my best not to repeat too many things. But from both a POS and a Sevenoaks perspective, I'll just add a few thoughts if I can, and reiterate a few things, and perhaps in some cases maybe generalise a little bit to make the point. I think really what we're looking at across the board is just this huge amount of accelerated learning that's been going on over the past few months, and things that might have been distant dreams only 6 months or so ago are now very much embedded in reality. I think we've also seen a shift in people's attitudes towards change. I think we're seeing new levels of bravery, perhaps a willingness to take what previously might have been regarded as unacceptable risks. And I think the operational changes are definitely deriving efficiencies from different ways of working. There's no doubt about it, whether that's actual cost savings, whether it's time savings, whether it's energy savings, whether it's enhancing your net zero credentials. And I think we've all probably seen some stats that make it look really quite rosy. But just a point of caution, I suppose, in terms of some of those metrics. So many planning authorities, and we've heard, I think, already that over the past 3 months or so, productivity is actually up. We're seeing more applications being determined than the same period last year. We're seeing backlogs reduced. We're seeing the time taken to determine applications in some cases improving as well. But from the conversations I've had, people are tending to work longer hours, particularly towards the start of the response, perhaps because there was little else to do. But we're finding people starting earlier, perhaps starting at the time that they would have commenced their journey to work. People are taking fewer and shorter breaks throughout the working day, and people are working longer into the evenings and maybe finishing at the time that they would have got home from work. So we just need to be mindful of that, because it's not necessarily sustainable going forward. I think we've also seen that people's reactions to working from home or working anywhere but the office vary hugely depending on personal circumstance. So you're lucky enough perhaps to have a spare room or a home office and a good kit and a good setup, then it might all seem quite straightforward. But if you're in shared or cramped accommodation, the challenges are very different. I think working off a laptop on your knee on the sofa all day is altogether a very different experience. Victoria,
you may need to shut your window, Richard. Is it very windy there?
No, it's not, but I will do.
Okay, thank you. Talking of challenges, I'm sorry, do carry on.
Yeah, sorry. So if you're in shared or cramped accommodation, I think the challenge is very different from if you've got at home. And I think actually chiefs and senior officers need to be particularly careful, because what might suit them might not necessarily suit the bulk of the organisations. Sorry, I've still got a sound in my ear as well, so bear with me. It's a bit off-putting. I think we're also seeing a new attitude in meetings. I think we're all used to perhaps rehearsing key points, managing a bit of a script, having a series of desired outcomes and knowing where your red lines are. But now, albeit virtually, we're actually inviting strangers to our own homes. And in the main, I think we're displaying new levels of tolerance. I think we're displaying new levels of patience. I think perhaps we're even displaying new levels of vulnerability. And in a slightly odd way, that's bringing people together. We've probably all seen things. We've seen cats walk across laptops. We've seen housemates and kids.
Is everybody else on mute on this call? Because we're disturbance for Richard there. So could we double check everybody's on mute? Thank you so much. Sorry, Richard, to interrupt again.
It's okay.
That's better.
That links beautifully to my new levels of patience. Yeah. And I was saying, you know, in the main, all these things, it doesn't really seem to matter. Putting aside stories, I think, of committees being hijacked with unwanted interventions early on and perhaps members sneaking a gulp of beer. But given the sheer number of the meetings that are taking place, those instances are few and far between. And I think also on a similar theme, it's really pleasing that we're seeing recruitment continue during this time. And I've heard some great stories from councils and from candidates about how the virtual experience is actually a really great experience. So candidates are telling us that actually they're more relaxed. They're in a familiar environment. They haven't had to plan a journey maybe to an unfamiliar location. They haven't had to worry about finding a parking space or missing a bus or wondering if they've got time for one more cup of coffee. So the interviews that we're having are far more conversational, and I think perhaps they're more authentic, and perhaps the candidates get a slightly different sense of the organisation in quite a positive way, because they're seeing its culture through a slightly different lens. And I suppose that probably leads me on to my final point for now, and these are just some of the challenges, I suppose, that we've got going forward. But it's how do our organisations maintain cultures that they've worked sometimes very hard for many years to embed in a remote and in a digital workplace? Those people-to-people interactions that we're all familiar with, that demonstrate behaviours and emotions and values that show care for one another, actually are much more difficult to achieve at the moment. And I think we need to think about how we can make sure that all our coaching and our mentoring remains effective without becoming overly formulaic, and how we can pick up on people's individual challenges, the conversations around the office, and even how we pick up on their struggles when body language is far less apparent. So I think there's a huge amount of really positive operational change, which actually I think I'd love to see stay in many cases. But I think there's still lots of challenges for us all to challenge ourselves with as we go forward as well. Thank you.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for that. And as you said, there's a lot of excellent points made before, so it's really helpful to have that kind of the broader angle on the cultural aspects in particular, which are fascinating and will be the subject of many research theses, I'm sure, for many, many years to come for students. Now, I wonder whether Ian MacLeod from Birmingham has been able to join us on the line.
Hi, Victoria. How are you? Apologies for the...
No, that's okay. We're delighted to have you here. I gave you a really good introduction earlier, talking about Birmingham's ambitious growth plans, the delivery, lots going on. You've got the Commonwealth Games coming next year or the year after. Sorry if I've got the year wrong. And the show must go on. So can I hand over to you, and you can introduce yourself and also tell us what's been going on in Birmingham. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. No, thanks so much, Victoria. And so I'm Ian MacLeod, the Interim Director for Inclusive Growth at Birmingham City Council. Apologies, my internet has worked flawlessly over the last 3 months, but the only 2 times that it's completely collapsed are when I've been on conferences, so when I've been speaking as well. So typically it happened again today. But I suppose to give you a bit of backdrop as to the city's response. I mean, we went to, as probably others have talked about, and if I am repeating people, I do apologise. Feel free to cut and put me to stop me, Victoria. But we went to a virtual planning committee quite quickly. We used our emergency powers once between myself and the chair of the planning committee just to determine a few non-controversial applications, keep the committee load reasonably light the first of the virtual committee that we went to. But we got that up and running quickly. I mean, since then, the committee's really virtually has been working very well. And I've got to say, I think the resilience of our officers in terms of sort of adapting to the new environment of working from home and, getting applications determined, it's all worked pretty smoothly. So I think, as I heard at the start before I lost connection, that at Hackney, performance has pretty much been maintained. If anything, it's slightly improved since we went into lockdown. So since March, we've determined in excess of 2,000 planning applications now within the city. That's all been working well. We've been getting through the applications quite smoothly. And we put in place then the amendments really in terms of the government have suggested in terms of still regulations, some additional flexibility there, additional working hours on site. But we've been able to determine some pretty major schemes. The HS2 Curzon Station now had planning consent that went to one of our first virtual committees. So the big schemes are still sort of working their way through. We approved a 50-storey tower at one east side in the city centre as well. So that's all. I have to admit, I think the staff have worked incredibly hard really to keep up performance, and it's not easy working from home, all the time. And I think getting, I hope that we will be able to get back to a, certainly even if it's not the levels of working within the office that we had previously, but certainly a better balance. Or what we've got now, where it's sort of 100% working from home. And I do hope in the future we'll be able to get back, whether that's, it's only 2 or 3 days a week, but allowing more flexibility of staff so they do have that mix of between sort of home and office working. But as I said, performance has been very, very strong. We've been able to keep that going. We've been asking applicants to put site notices up, which was one of the changes we put in place early on. That's reduced. And we've also put in place a protocol site visits, just so officers are clear in terms of the procedures they have to follow when they are going out on site, or if they do have to go out. We've obviously tried to discourage that as much as possible, but where they have gone out, we've put in place a clear sort of protocol for them conducting site visits and how those should be done. The big sort of schemes then, as I said, HS2 is very much sort of moving forward. Commonwealth Games, obviously that is a real challenge for us with the 2022 date. We're working through with the organising committee what the impacts are on the sort of some elements of the construction programme, which has obviously been impacted by COVID. But very much, regardless of the impact in the short term, we're very much committed to the legacy of the Games, delivering the housing regeneration that we're undertaking at Perry Bar and the new pool that's being built at Sandwell. So those projects, regardless of the deadlines, we have very much sort of pressing ahead with them currently. So I sort of pause there, Victoria, if there's any questions anyone wants to ask, and apologies again, I came in so late.
No, that's very helpful, and I'm glad you were able to join, because I mean it's a different perspective. Again, what we're hearing there is that unlike the Olympic Games, which has been postponed, the Commonwealth Games is all systems go, and very tight timescale. It always was, but all moving ahead in the direction there, and the scale of the applications, and you know, many congratulations for getting your HS2 application through this period of time. Now, we've now been for a virtual tour around the UK, and which has been fabulous to hear from our 7 panellists. We do have an answer function on this GoToWebinar platform. I appreciate, like has been said earlier, many of us are now experts in Microsoft Teams, Zoom. Hopefully now you're getting to grips with a GoToWebinar. We do have the questions area there if you want to send some questions, but I'm going to get the ball rolling, if I may. And mine really relates to delegation and levels of delegation. What we saw early on, in advance of there being, for example, primary legislation to enable digital virtual committees, some authorities moved quite quickly to delegate more to chief officers. As a professional body, what we've been saying for some time is the importance of the chief planning officer role at the top table in local government, the importance of having professional qualifications, particularly having these that chartership means that you are well placed to take decisions against an already adopted strategy, i.e. a local plan. But this is a controversial area. Some people have broadly welcomed the opportunity for more to be delegated to senior officers. Other areas, other views are that we don't want to see so much delegated to senior officers. This sits all with politicians, defer decisions. Does anyone on the panel have any views in relation to this? Would anyone like to go first? And can I ask our panellists to make themselves visible, if possible?
Victoria, I'm happy to kick off.
Yes, thank you, Pam. So yeah, I hope you heard the question there, because I've got that dreaded red box that flashed up to say your experience network problems. Did you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, Pam, why don't you go first? Well, do you have any views on what I've just said there?
Yeah, I think it might differ in different authorities. I'm content with the level of delegation we have in Fife Council to myself. I took a view that I didn't want additional delegation as a result of COVID, because I felt it would increase the risks. And actually what we are seeking to more and more do in a Fife context and a Scottish context is engage communities more and more in the planning system and increase their confidence. So rather than focus on delegation, we just put our resources in working with colleagues in legal and committee services to quickly get up and running our committee services. And that certainly, I think, has gone down well with many people who are interacting with us in the planning system.
Yeah. So yes, I'm going to bring Aidan in now. Aidan, but do you share the view? Slightly different view?
Slightly different. We've taken a very different approach over in Belfast, and one of the reasons for that is because our council is run by committees and not a cabinet system, because politics here is quite tense at times, given some of our history. So a lot of our all of our committees are now operating with additional delegated powers from the chief executive. So I'm responsible for the planning and the licensing committees, both of which are undertaken in that way. We are going to be moving to a more virtual using Teams experience from August, and we have trialled that with our full council meeting. But I do think that for us, I think it's been very useful in having those additional powers, because that's allowed us to keep things moving. And our committees previously could last up to 4 hours at a time, and we're getting some really quick committee decisions through the system, which from a efficiency point of view has been really useful.
So just to clarify that, Aidan, you saying that all applications have been delegated to you, or a larger proportion?
So a larger proportion. So we do, as part of our additional delegated powers, we do seek the views of all of the individual committee members. So we do get their input, but then the ultimate decision based on that knowledge of how the members would have voted is used to decide whether we go with the officer recommendation. We haven't gone against any officer recommendation through this process, but we have deferred some decisions to allow them to take place from August onwards, when members will be able to have their input.
Great. Okay. Well, before I move on to a different thing, does anyone else have any views there in terms of, should we be keeping some of these increased levels of delegation to help smooth things forward, or should we go back to, how it was previously? Any other views on that? I appreciate it's a sensitive.
Yeah, if I could just come in quickly there. I suppose from our point of view at Tower Hamlets, as I mentioned, we have quite generous powers of delegation already, so we haven't changed that at all. And that's kind of meant that we have been able to carry on doing our committees as we needed them to, but make timely decisions. So I guess what I'd say is we had it about right already, and so that's helped us during this time.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some other nodding there. So, I know I can't see Richard from Sevenoaks, but did you want to add anything, Richard, to that?
No, just to echo that last point, actually, I think our delegation percentage was somewhere near 99% in any event. We've run 3 virtual DC committees via Zoom, which have been a learning curve, I think, for everybody involved. They take a lot more administration in terms of the Dem Services officers to try and drive them, I suppose, going forward. But no, I think we were fortunate enough to be well placed before the lockdown, so no changes here.
Well, I mean, just on that committee's point, actually, we've heard from some local authorities that they've had record numbers of people zooming in to join committees. Now, they could all be planners, but they could actually be members of the community as well. In a kind of a post-COVID world, and we don't know what that looks like or when it looks like, but let's just say committee meetings go back to being in the chambers or rooms that they met in previously. Does any of the panel have any views that we should actually keep that practice of streaming those committees virtually, and indeed have opportunities for councillors to join virtually? Any views on that? Bev's first. Thank you, Bev.
Victoria, yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I mean, these numbers aren't earth-shattering numbers to begin with, but yes, there was a monumental uptake in the amount of people that watched it. I mean, there's still small numbers compared to our population, but no, I think it's a way forward. It's a supplementary way of bringing more people to the table who feel that that's a better form of communication for them. I don't think it necessarily replaces the physical proximity of a committee decision. Although I have to say, there's some rules of engagement that I think could use a bit more training. The fact that this is now a recorded meeting, this is now something that can be played back to you very specifically to remind you exactly what you said. And I know some authorities already have that system and they're already used to that, but many others are not. And we've had a few times where people have denied saying something where perhaps there's evidence where they very much did. So I think this, and that's got to add, because one of the criticisms we've had, for instance, of our growth board, which is not your typical committee structure, is a lack of transparency, is a lack of clarity. And I think anything that takes away from that perception that there's a lack of transparency, which then leads to, unfortunately, well, if I can't see it, then something bad must be happening. I think it's got to be a good thing going forward for planning. I think, going back to what Pam said, you might get more people trusting and engaging in the plan making system if they feel that the totality of the democracy around that is open to them. So I think it's got to be a good thing going forward.
Well, thank you for that. I want to come in, but of course I'm going to give our panelists first privilege here. So Victoria, you had your hand up. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, just to say, we have had our planning committee's webcast for over 2 years now, and it was a bit of a culture shock to start with, because of that very reason that Bev just said. Everything you say will come back to haunt you, and mine frequently do. And we have a lovely blogger who likes to take photographs just at the right moment of the screenshot when you're looking your best. So all of those issues aside, I actually think it is really good for public engagement, and it enabled us to move our meetings into daytime rather than evening meetings and so on, so that you could have that level of engagement, which is all for the good. So I like the idea of a hybrid type situation being used in the future for both members of the public and members to be able to join via a virtual means as well as being in the room. I think nothing really is quite the same as everybody being in the room, and you get that sort of vibe and that feeling. I think members kind of bounce off each other when they're in the same room, but there's definitely a place for this if it means that more people can access planning committee and can watch and engage with it. So I think it's a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, Victoria, I recognise so much of what you say there. Having worked in a previous role for the Greater London Authority for many years, where we had City Hall TV. When I was running a mayoral development corporation, every single board meeting and every single planning committee was broadcast out, well, effectively globally. But interestingly, that meant no one actually came to the meetings in person because they were quite happy to watch at home. And I think what we're seeing here is there's this disparity in some local authorities who are already geared up to do this, and others who have never done this but are now doing it. And I think what we'll be saying as a professional body is it would be great if all areas who wanted to do this were resourced to do it. And we put together our 5 asks for planning reform, and one of those for the government was some investment in the digital capability, if you like, plan tech, to enable that broader engagement out. Now, I couldn't see if Pam had her hand up or not there because of the way the light's shining in. No, you didn't. I can see you're shaking your head there. So I think that the committee's aspect has been particularly fascinating for us. Now, one of the interesting things that has been touched on today has been enforcement, actually. And you know, as Victoria said, when if everybody's locked down at home, you know, what's that expression? Well, the cat's away, the mice will play. Well, it sounds like some mice in particular have been having all sorts of fun. Do you have any views on the opportunities for doing things, for example, more in the way that we've heard it at Fife with drones and getting around and doing this sort of active surveillance? I mean, do we even need enforcement officers in the future if we can do the whole lot by drones? Has anyone got any views on these sorts of capabilities? I think that we now have. It's a sensitive one, isn't it? The surveillance. Yes. Okay, Bev. Thank you.
Well, in a previous life as a chief officer of planning and transport, I can remember horrible weekends, waiting for the phone to call to see who decided to cut their tree down on a Sunday morning at the worst time of a holiday. And I think, so I'm sure that feeling is shared around. There's got to be a role for that technology to play. In fact, it's so quiet around my place now. I now know who exactly is cutting their trees down when they probably shouldn't be cutting them down. So I think there must be a role there for technology, but I think we've got to be very, very careful. And certainly I know I've worked for councils, I won't say which color, you can probably guess, who get very twitchy when you start talking about more cameras, and in particular ones that can go anywhere at any time. So I don't think it replaces the role of an enforcement officer. I don't think it replaces the legal requirement for making sure you've got visual eyes, but can it be a supplementary tool? Sure it can. And in particular, I'm thinking more in our part of the world here where we've got some European designations and there's some things where people need to stay out, at certain times of the year. There's lots of ways that technology can be massively helpful to what has always been a very thinly resourced area of planning, frankly. But I don't think it can replace physical people on the ground.
That's great. I'm going to carry on asking questions here because our attendees are all listening in, but not asking questions. So, and Richard, just jump in at any point. We haven't got enough technology here to get everybody up on the screen. One of the things I want to talk about is something the RTPI is very passionate about, is our equality, diversity and inclusivity strategy change. And we're thinking about how we can get a more representative profession of the communities that we represent, and very much putting engagement at the heart of that. So something we've been thinking about recently is this opportunity to hold more committees virtually, it means that a greater diversity of people could be encouraged to get involved with planning, but also being a councillor locally. Let's face it, if one of the requirements is that you need to sit in 1 or 2 or 3 committee meetings late at night every week or every month, this could be off-putting to certain types of people who may have caring commitments, or may, quite frankly, just not feel safe travelling around, coming back late at night from a council chamber. So we think that the opportunity to be able to provide an ongoing engagement in committees from the comfort of your home, I'll use that in a very loosely, is a great opportunity to open up the diversity, if you like, of not just the engagement, but also those people who are involved in decision making, to make committees, planning committees, a bit more representative. Do you think we are onto something here? Are we living in La La Land? Has anyone got any views on that? Yes, sorry, Aidan, thank you.
Yeah, I think you do have a point there. There's been countless times when people like in the community do find coming to a planning committee very daunting, very off-putting, and it can be, depending what your chamber's like, a real place of discomfort for many. So I think having the ability to tune in from a safe space, be that a local community centre, your own home, or just somewhere else where you're familiar, would really help with increasing the engagement from the population. In terms of members themselves and members of the planning committee, I've known a few who have swapped off planning committees because, for example, they've just had babies and they couldn't have the commitment of seeing through their committee responsibilities and looking after children. So I think a more virtual approach to that would be able to help that side of things as well.
Yeah, and am I sensing general agreement here across the panel? Because that's something I think, unless we take the opportunity to make the case to bank some of these new ways of working, perhaps there's a risk that things just go back to how they were in entirety. And that may be a lost opportunity. To some of what you may read on Twitter and actually other social media platforms is actually the agility and the ability of planning and planners to be able to keep things moving forward. It's been really quite phenomenal, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to convene this conversation. We've done a few bits and pieces, but actually to show the breadth of that across the UK is really quite important at this particular moment in time, when the government are thinking about what to do with planning, how planning can support a green recovery. We're very clear in our minds at the Royal Town Planning Institute that planning has got a very key role in supporting that recovery. And just today we've launched a new campaign, Plan the World We Want. And this is about taking these opportunities that you've all been talking about to ensure that we don't just go back to what we were doing, but planning in a very strategic sense sits at the heart of that recovery. And if anything, the conversations we've been having today has just really reinforced that. For anybody who is a naysayer or thinks that planning is holding things up, blocking and basically standing in the way, we say it quite regularly as the professional body, but there's nothing like hearing from the chief planners, the heads of planning, who actually are at the coalface, to really set out very clearly that that is not the case. We've heard some fantastic examples today of how planning is not just well positioned to support green recovery, but is actually doing it. Yes, there's some tailing off of applications, but there's also catching up a backlog in some areas. It's back to business as usual or business as unusual. We're not quite sure, as we heard from Jennifer earlier, not quite sure what's going on, but we're too busy. We're just going to get on and crack on as we were. keep calm and carrying on. And I think if anybody was in any doubt that the planning wasn't moving forward in the right direction, then perhaps in listening to this, which we hope they do on YouTube, they may be able to be influenced otherwise. Now, something I'm very passionate about at the Royal Town Planning Institute is the convening role, and it's something I think Pam referenced earlier. You know, you have very excellent conversations with heads of planning in Scotland, and Victoria was saying the same in the Welsh context, and I know that Richard Morris is in his new presidency role for POS in England will be seeking to do the same. But we want to broaden that conversation across the nations, and I think today for us has hopefully been another part of cementing that along the route, to really elevating the conversation of planning and the importance of planning and planners, the important role, and moving away from it just being seen to be a regulatory function, to actually being that enabling function, and really the ability to join the dots with the economic recovery to the green recovery. You know, if we think about it, we've got a triple helix, if you like, of things going on at the moment. We've got a global pandemic, we've got a climate change crisis, and potentially we've got a hard Brexit. And, you know, never before has there been a need for all of planners to work together. Now, the reason why we are doing this in the public sector here is there are lots of opportunities for us to network across the broader profession, but we think the opportunity to bring heads of planning from the public sector together across the nations has been, I hope, a really, really interesting conversation, not just amongst ourselves and everybody who's listening in now, but as we continue to grow our YouTube channel, we hope that the conversation will go far, far wider. Now, I would very much like this to be an annual event going forward, and I hope that, and you'll pardon the pun there, I hope that Hope can be a physical as well as virtual event next summer. It was always going to be open access, by the way, although it's nestled within the Plan Alive. For those people who aren't coming to the Plan Alive and not buying their ticket, it was going to be the free part of the event, open access to any chief or head of planning to come along. So that is the plan for next year. I hope that we can broaden the base out and the opportunity for discussion, and I'd very much welcome the feedback from all of those listening in, whether they have found it helpful as well. So I'm now going to go back round the panel and really leave you an opportunity for closing remarks, either how you found this session today, what you've learned, what you might hope for the future. Again, pardon the pun, sorry, I can't help myself now. So I'm going to run in the same order. Firstly, Jennifer Peters from Tower Hamlets. 30 seconds from you. Thank you.
I guess it's interesting to see how other people have coped, and it sounds like we've all done quite similar things, which is great. We're not missing a trick, I guess. But also I think that importance of planning is, you know, come through, and that is really important. And I think, as you've pointed out, given the government's kind of slightly wavering towards let's get rid of planning, that these kind of conversations are all the more important to show how much planning has such a role in ensuring that this kind of event that's happening at the moment in terms of COVID is something that we can deal with and isn't a struggle for our sort of built environment.
That's great, and thank you again for all your comments. Bev Hindle from Oxfordshire, closing remarks from you.
Thank you, Victoria. I'm just really pleased that we're using the technology to share stories across the whole of the nation and beyond. I just think, why wouldn't we do this, and why wouldn't it make sense, and why can't we go even further? We're really excited about the fact that the loop and the distance is so much close. I just know personally, I'm saving somewhere around 20 hours of traveling a week. That's really great. It's been good for my family. It's been good for my thinking, and I'd like to continue. Not everybody can. I'm in a position where I can, and I hope others who can are able to, because I think it's about being able to do what's right for the individuals to be able to contribute to that bigger story. And the last thing about planners, it's not disagreeing with you, Victoria. I think planning can be a negative, it's down to us to make it a positive. I don't want planning to be used as a tool to stop change happening around a clean, green, inclusive economy going forward. We have an opportunity to really blow the doors open on that in a very positive way, and I really hope we take advantage of that. Thank you, and thanks very much,
Right.
and nice to meet everybody.
No, that's great. And Pam Ewan from Fife, closing remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. I think this has been a really good session and sharing good experiences. I think for me, every challenge brings opportunities, and that's what we have to hold to. I'm really proud of planning. I'm really proud of planners up and down the length and breadth of the UK. And I think we've shown that through lots of examples we've heard in this session. And I really look forward to the opportunities that will lie ahead. And no doubt there will be things that we haven't even thought about coming out of COVID that will pop up, but we'll deal with them, and we'll deal with them positively.
That's great. Thank you very much. Aidan Thatcher from Belfast City.
Yeah, thank you. I think this has been a really useful session, just getting together and having the opportunity to share the experiences. What's really come out of our response collectively is there's been so much collaboration between partners and different organisations just to help keep things moving, and that's been really positive. I think we've all shared experience of how our staff have just changed how they've worked in really short order in some quite testing circumstances, which is a real testament to them. And really, it's the opportunity for fresh thinking. Let's use this to see what works really well, and let's keep doing it in the future, because there's an opportunity to allow more people to engage with the planning system.
That's great. Thank you very much. Victoria Robinson from the Vale of Glamorgan, closing remarks.
Thank you. Yeah, just like everybody else, I'd echo this has been a great session, and I'd be really looking forward to next year and to doing it again, hopefully in person. And it's really nice to see the perspectives across the whole of the UK and to see we're all doing very similar things. So that's great. And also just to sort of really build on what others have said around COVID being an opportunity for planning to respond to the new challenges that have come out of it, but the really good opportunities around climate change and reduced travelling and those kind of things that we can really pick up on, and we sort of almost won hearts and minds by accident, and how people can change the way they live in more sustainable ways, but also to face some of the challenges to our high street and the economy that we're clearly going to see in the next couple of years, and making sure that the planning system is there to do what we can to make sure that those issues are addressed in a positive way. So plenty to do, I think, the next few years.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Richard Morris, if I turn my webcam off, you may be able to turn yours on. Should we just try and, there you are, Richard, closing remarks.
There we are, thank you. Yeah, just a couple of points really. I think firstly, the conversation that we've had today and the experiences that we've all talked about from our organisations just shows what a talented profession we have, whether that's about agility or responsiveness or attitude to embrace change and challenge. I think we should all be really proud of the profession in that sense. And then the second point really is around recovery. I think we've all been playing separate parts in the initial response, but in terms of the recovery going forward, we need to make sure if we're not invited to those conversations about recovery planning, then we need to elbow our way into those conversations, because I think we've got a key part to play in some of that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Ian MacLeod from Birmingham, if you're on the line, Ian.
Oh, thanks, Victoria. I agree with a lot of what you said, actually. I think planning has a massive role to play in the economic recovery post-COVID. Huge challenges lie ahead of us, and if we're going to deliver a more inclusive green recovery, which I think everybody's trying to push to achieve, I think planning's got a vital role to play in that. So I think we've done a great job in this initial period of keeping planning applications, getting them determined, and I think the fact we've been able to do that across the board is a really positive reflection on the profession, and keeping performance going. That's a key role in terms of making businesses come out of this economic downturn. So I think that's been a great effort, and I really think now driving forward, as you've talked about climate change, more inclusive growth, regenerating some of the inner city areas, planning's got a vital role to play with that, and I really think we need to continue to push the profession to help achieve those objectives.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panellists here today. As I said, I'd like to do this annually. Next year we'll have a different panel, and the panel who are here today will be in the audience. In addition to launching our hashtag Plan the World We Need campaign today, we've also launched a film with it as well, which is on our YouTube channel, but it's also on our website. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But I'm quite proud of it because it's a very simple visual way of describing what planning is all about, why we need it. So any way at all you can help us to share that will be much, much appreciated. I've thoroughly enjoyed today. It really has been a fantastic opportunity to use the convening power of the RTPI to bring together, I think, as Richard said, such talent. We know we're only scratching the surface here because there are hundreds of heads of planning and chief planners all over the UK and Ireland. And so let's keep this conversation going. Thank you again to all of you for making the time available in this incredibly busy period. And as is the new way, I believe that we all have to wave goodbye now, because we don't do that in meetings, but we do it virtually. So thank you very much. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and we will meet again next year, but if not before. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks, Victoria. Bye.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. Bye.